First of all, decentralized information wins. It just does, right? I mean, so the actual economic model, I think, at the end of the day, when you set aside all the other challenges that make decentralization difficult, decentralization and open source wins. Look at Linux, look at the internet itself. The internet basically killed the intranet model, and it meant that, siloed sources of information failed because the wisdom of the crowd, the breadth of information that's available was always going to be so much more powerful when you opened it all up. So I think there's just an underlying economic advantage that comes from opening things up that is going to be a force to force some of these closed systems to open up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind with CoinFund. For those of you just tuning in for the first time today, my name is Jake Brookman, and I'm CEO and managing partner at CoinFund. Today, I'm with my co-host, David Packman. Hey, David. Great to be here with you today. How's it going?
It's good. It's good. Nice to be here with you and everyone else. And I want to know, have you beat the Singapore jet lag, you poor guy? How was Token 49 in Solana?
Well, I beat the jet lag. I thought the conference was, or both the conferences, I should say, was really great. There was something like 800 side events. It felt like 4 floors densely packed with crypto startup booths and a lot of panels going on. Huge topic was decentralized AI, as is the, sort of beacon of our times here. But it really felt like one of the more, if not most, bullish events for crypto of the year as prices are starting to tick up into the election here. So I had a great time.
I saw some amazing video footage of people jamming to get into certain parties. So crypto had a good buzz about it.
That's right. Awesome. Well, I'm excited for this one.
Me too, because there's really no one better than getting you and our guests together to talk about decentralized AI. So we're very excited to welcome today's guest. He is an author. He's a media executive. He's an entrepreneur. He's been innovating in Web3 for at least a decade, I think. He was most recently the chief content officer and chair of consensus at CoinDesk. And he recently announced his new venture, which is the chairman of the Decentralized AI Society. So please welcome to the podcast a great thinker and all-around great friend, Michael Casey. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hey, David. Thank you so much for having me. And hi, Jake.
Hey, Michael. Welcome.
Yeah, I mean, those 800 side events in Singapore, remember as well, the F1 track in the middle of it, shutting down big parts of the city. It was hot, it was rainy. Getting to events was a bit of a challenge with all that lockdown. But I agree, it was a buzzy event. There was just a lot of energy there. It felt like networking is like a 2x on what you experience in a lot of US events. It seems to just be a faster pace. In Asia, that might be a stereotype, but it certainly felt like things were moving very quickly, which I think was a good sign.
And it was so well organized too. I mean, very thoughtfully done. Just everything ran more or less on time. And, for such a big event, I think it took like a little city of coordinators and organizers to run it, but they did it.
Yeah. I mean, I can now say kudos to them, right? Back, a few months ago, I was the chairman of Consensus, and I probably had to, I don't know, do what I could to poo-poo Consensus's major competitor. But no, definitely hats off. It was a well-run and I think pretty productive event for sure.
The two of you have been in crypto more than 10 years. And for much of crypto's existence, it feels like the narratives that it promulgated were diverging from the directions of mainstream tech. But here on this topic, AI, there's really no bigger topic in tech right now than AI. And this is certainly becoming a well-followed and, much discussed topic in Web3, decentralized AI. So it feels to me like we have two very different views of what an AI-enabled future can be. And I think we're going to try to explore that today.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, Michael, maybe do you want to jump in to talk a little bit about the Decentralized AI Society, and what is that? What are you working on there? And how do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a good place to start, because if you're picking up on, what David just said about the two different sort of divergent views of where this goes. Look, our thinking is the centralized players who really, more or less the same players that dominated the Web 2 era, the big platforms that emerged, at the turn of the millennium, they really do have a head start, right? They've got all the data. They have massive amounts of capital. If you just look at what's happened to their stock prices, and add Nvidia into that in over the past couple of years in the AI boom, and they've got a lot of the compute, right? AWS, literally, Amazon, is the go-to place to get your cloud compute, or you just buy it directly from Nvidia, and the whole nexus there allows for a massive, almost oligopolistic type of control over the direction of AI. And you guys have known me for a while, and where I stand on these issues. I wrote a book this year with Frank McCourt called Our Biggest Fight, about why we need to really reform the economic and incentive structures of the internet, and why that's becoming all the more urgent in the age of AI. So I just really see the need to tackle and go up against that model as not only a kind of an economic imperative for those of us who are interested in seeing it from an economic perspective, but really a moral imperative, because I just do not know how we are going to have a healthy AI development trajectory if the algorithms are closed and controlled by these gigantic organizations that have the capacity to manipulate us, as we've already seen is the case in the Web 2 era. So with that in mind, we formed DAIS, the Decentralized AI Society, to try to give this kind of greater organizational capacity to what are really quite small but quite numerous startups, alongside the bigger layer one protocols who are now really getting into AI, to come together and give collective action some power, whether that is for capital purposes, whether it is to try to solve some of the big engineering problems, whether it's to sort of act as a voice to improve the policy environment for this sec, or whether it's like for education purposes to really bring the mainstream along with what we're trying to say and get people over the hump about why this matters. I think there's a lot that a body like this can do. So that's really the point. I spent much of my life convening. I think that's kind of what journalists do in a way. We bring voices, and we don't necessarily lead the narrative. We kind of curate the narrative through this convening process, and consensus was a very big part of that, a major convening event. So I think I'm trying to bring that capacity that I bring to this now, and bring these players together so that we can sort of collectively solve some of these big problems and give the industry a chance to fight up against the other guys who have had that head start, as I said.
Let me ask both of you, is not to be defeatist, because I'm an optimist, but is it too late? Is the horse out of the barn? Do these guys have such a strong head start that it's hard to create an alternative path, or what gives you both confidence that there is a decentralized path that can be a counterweight?
So I'll take the sort of the philosophical high level stuff. I think Jake might be able to go in the weeds a little bit more, but I think, first of all, decentralized information wins. It just does, right? I mean, so the actual economic model, I think, at the end of the day, when you set aside all the other challenges that make decentralization difficult, decentralization and open source wins. Look at Linux, look at the internet itself. The internet basically killed the intranet model, and it meant that siloed sources of information failed, because the wisdom of the crowd, the breadth of information that's available, was always going to be so much more powerful when you opened it all up. So I think there's just an underlying economic advantage that comes from opening things up, that is going to be a force to force some of these closed systems to open up. The problem we face is that, as we said, they've got all these advantages right now, and I think time is not on our side. So, if we're worried about Skynet or, the Matrix coming along, it's a battle. Eventually that decentralization would win, but do we get to the point where it's just too late to be able to take them on because the system has been co-opted entirely? And that's why I think we do need to really think hard strategically about how we take them on. So I think that leaning heavily into the opportunities that decentralization actually will bring. I mean, just think about compute. Enterprises are paying through the nose to get either direct access to GPUs from NVIDIA, or to access cloud compute by the only sort of real provider of this, AWS, at a massive markup for what it would be. If we can get a proper market to emerge around the provision of cloud compute in a decentralized framework, that really should drive down the price significantly of access to that, which is one piece of the puzzle. And I think that you're going to find a lot of mainstream companies are going to want that, because this is a very expensive game for them to be in as it is. And I know, Jake, you've got all sorts of ideas about just thinking outside the box about different models that are going to help to actually sort of tackle this as well. And we can get into that. But I think that higher level issue about, open information ultimately wins is a good thing to keep in mind as we move forward.
Well, I certainly have a bunch of opinions here, but David, to answer your question, maybe I'll give you like one philosophical set of thoughts and one practical set of thoughts. So philosophically, I probably differ from some other investors in style in that a technologist can sit down to evaluate these two technologies, centralized AI and decentralized AI, and you can come to two different conclusions. Like one person might say, oh, the decentralized side is like really hard, therefore we shouldn't do it. We should stick with the traditional approach. And someone else might say, if you solve that really hard problem, the outcome is actually like really big. And I'm very much on the second type, right? Like I have a friend in academia who has a lot of friends who do political science. And one of them at some point went, I understand all the problems with our society now. I'm going to write a paper about it, right? And then you have Elon Musk, who's like, I'm sick of this society. I'm going to go to Mars, right? And so I really appreciate entrepreneurs who are taking on the really hard problems, that they're advancing the state of the art. And if you look at decentralizing AI, the different aspects of decentralizing training, making inference verifiable, opening up data pipelines, to Michael's point, opening up compute to some extent, or I should say, even more interestingly, making AI trainable on commodity hardware versus like this high-end hardware that's so expensive and bottlenecked. Those are all really difficult problems. And investors, like our investors at CoinFund, sometimes ask me, like, isn't this decentralized AI stuff, isn't really this kind of an ideological preference? And the answer is like, no, it's a huge commercial opportunity. I mean, like, yes, I want to see the world where this stuff is more open, but it's actually a huge opportunity if we're right. And so the other thing on a practical level I want to say is, first of all, anyone who solves these really hard problems, they're gonna do really well. Like just watching some of the deep tech founders right now in the space, like pushing that state of the art and already starting to train models in a decentralized way. Like, for example, BitTensor integrated Noose Research's distro framework like the other day and really retraced their token price from about a year ago. There's a lot of excitement around that. And as people sort of learn that actually, this stuff it's just an active research area and things are possible here, I think like more and more people will get into it. And what we're about to actually enter is a decentralized AI training race a little bit, even as the centralized guys are racing their LLMs. Now the decentralized guys are going to start racing, their approaches as well. So I'm excited, but basically, I do think we're going to see a lot of work being done here. We're going to see products. And even if we're not immediately like outperforming the frontier models, there's a number of areas where we're reaching like really big markets. Like even just the idea of like moving training from high-end hardware to commodity hardware, that really like more evenly distributes AI across the world. And that's actually really valuable. But I also don't want to say that like we can't beat Google, because my argument would be, if you want to source more compute than all the big tech put together, like I would argue the only way to do that is through a decentralized network where the long tail coordinates with each other and does that. And so, that would be the strategy that I would bet on if I actually want to outperform them.
Let's not forget that AI itself is another weird force multiplier effect in this. I was just chatting to these guys about like, we're trying to figure out like, what would a functioning decentralized compute market look like? And we started to realize that like, in fact, it's not, yes, you're going to want your A100s from NVIDIA running this high-end machine learning and inference, but there's also a lot of back-end stuff that you need that's really doesn't need that level of high-tech stuff. It could just be really basic commodity-based, storage on an old Dell computer or something that you need for your back-end. You could create this modular kind of structure to the whole thing. But then this thing is like, well, if you build a market around that, you need to figure out what the pricing is in this very dynamic way. These different modules are all priced differently. It goes, well, AI would just do that for you, right? So you can have these sort of like, these AIs would actually come in and help us design a much more effective structure to the market for compute. Well, you can apply that to every other aspect of what we're doing. BitTensor is using AI to figure out how to optimize the development of these new decentralized models itself. So it's a really dynamic situation that we're in here in terms of this race. We've got the very tools that they're creating to help us actually compete with them.
And Michael, not trivially, some of what you're describing is like literally already in production, right? So I know that there are tools like, code assistants, basically. Also, the latest release from OpenAI, o1, is able to reason through bugs in code, is able to create much more robust, like actual coding output. So what you're saying is, it's not kind of like the HAL 2000 or 1000 or whatever from the movies yet, where it's totally like doing all the work for you. But as an assistant, it's definitely kind of making that process more efficient, more effective. And not to mention things like synthetic data, which are generated by LLMs and are used to basically like make the training of models more efficient and things like that.
Yeah, there is an observation that some have made that the largest, AI giants, the Googles and OpenAIs, have been using the LLMs just to try to get the training systems more efficient themselves. And that is the force multiplier, as you say, Michael, but also, it's kind of creating this feedback loop that makes it that much harder for, the nth participant to catch. Let me ask a question of both of you about, we'll break the problem into a couple different segments, but we're spending time on training today. Is it a sort of joint argument that decentralized GPU and commodity hardware clusters achieve two things that centralized AI training resources don't? One is lower cost, and two is super capacity. Or is it one of those more than the other? Jake, you made the argument that, if you're Google, you're only using all the GPUs that Google has, but if you wanted more, you could tap into a decentralized GPU network.
I guess I'll take this one since I've done a lot of work on this very recently. But so, David, first of all, I would actually argue that the dimension upon which these networks are going to be competitive is not cost, not necessarily cost. It's actually openness. And one of the reasons I say that is I think we're in like a point in time where compute is very expensive, but we could very quickly be in a point in time where compute is very oversupplied and very cheap. And for example, we see people endeavoring, Elon's building a 300,000 H100 data center. We have Microsoft just reopened 3 Mile Island as the only customer for its energy, right? And so everyone of these companies are making this huge bet that high-end hardware is required, and high-end hardware and this kind of scaling of it will lead proportionally to an increase in intelligence. First of all, that thesis could be very wrong, or at least that increase doesn't necessarily have to be linear, it could be like logarithmic, right? And suddenly we'll find ourselves with an oversupply of compute, and compute will be, very cheap. Now, I think what people really want out of decentralized training at the end of the day is they want a process to create models that is not so centralized in a few companies. So like if I'm a researcher and I want to try to build a competitive model, to something like GPT 4.0 or o1 or whatever, I don't necessarily want to have to work at Google or OpenAI or Meta or one of these, small number of firms in order to try that. The dream is, you could crowdfund the resources to do that. You can use an open network to train those models, and you can create products kind of in an independent way. And that is really the story of, all of the internet, from YouTube to publishing, is just lowering the costs of entry. It's also happening in like genetics research and other areas. So there's a lot more to say on a technical level about like what decentralized training, like how that might work and what it does. I'm happy to go into it, but let me pause there so Michael can give his view as well.
I just had a thought when you were talking about the idea that there could be too big a bet being placed on this high-end, massive, H100 data centers. It reminds me of the fiber optic bubble at the end of the 90s, where, the WorldComs and these other companies, essentially went out of business because they just bet that there'd just be a flood of it. And they had the dot-com bubble, of course, was a factor in that, but it wasn't an end. It wasn't that there was a drop-off in the demand for internet services or for information connectivity. I mean, the internet just soared after that. But it did mean that, like, I think that the bet they didn't realize was partly mobile was coming, and therefore that sort of changed the dynamics of that. But it was a flood. And it seems like that was a sort of a tipping point for other models to come in place. Ultimately, it facilitated the emergence of Web 2 and the power of Google and everything else. But it was a very important turning point. And so I don't know, maybe there's some history repeating itself there. Having talked to so many guys while I was in Singapore who were sort of in this deep in moment, there's a lot of work being done in how to connect all this hardware of all these different types. And it's at every different layer. It's people working out connectivity between, just phones and others. As I said, I've met these guys who just managed to acquire a very large supply of used, 2018 Dells that they are now, tapping into sort of a storage and backend solution through a deep in network to guys who are just taking these big GPU data centers and plugging them into the connectivity. So yeah, I mean, costs could come down dramatically if we get this right. And I think you're right, Jake, that it changes everything when that barrier to entry is lower. I think that part of the problem we face is this dependency on what I call the Magnificent Seven. Like, they're all part of the same game. They're using the NVIDIA chips. It's all being fed through the OpenAI framework for its LLM, and the others are sort of modeled on that. Amazon is providing all the cloud services, and you're sort of locked in this dependency because of the cost of everything at that layer. But open it up, and now everyone can play differently, and that changes not just the cost, but it changes the whole conversation about what we are training and who for, and what the structure of those models are, and everything else. It could be the very thing that just destroys the entire Web 2 model that we've become dependent on the last 20 years.
And honestly, at least based on data that I have, like, if you're living right now in the Web 2 AI world, wherever that might be, San Francisco or elsewhere, and you're sort of seeing what's going on around you, like, the local view is that, hey, it's actually like pretty annoying and difficult to train a quality AI model. There's just so many things that could go wrong. These processes are very unstable. They're not like mature. Like, you have to really work at a company and like get the experience of how to do it from the people who know how to do it. It's a bit of an apprenticeship discipline, right? Anyway, all that is to say that, like, if you're in SF right now and you're looking around, it looks like people are kind of giving up a little bit, and it almost looks like that, high power law model of, the biggest, most well-known model will sort of win. That to you looks like it's coming true because people are like, I probably, can't raise $1 billion for my seed round like Ilya. And, it's hard to train these models because I tried and I kind of failed, right? And so you're actually seeing a drop off in people training their own stuff in Web 2. But what a lot of those people like are not realizing is that the ability to do that, with the advent of these decentralized approaches like we have in our portfolio, Jensen, Prime Intellect, Pluralis, right? Other things in the market include News, Neuromesh maybe in the future. Like, that's going to dramatically change that status quo. And if you're not understanding that, you might actually be at a competitive disadvantage.
Let me ask you both, Jake, first, what are the catalysts we should be looking for to trigger that adoption or the usage more generally of decentralized AI training networks? And Michael, if you could sort of snap your fingers to help catalyze a decentralized AI future, what would that be?
I would say, like, just on your first question, David, like, really quick, we're at such a nascent stage here. We're like building the stack. We're kind of like where blockchains were, in 2016 or something, 2017. Like, we do not have enough infrastructure so far to do a fully end-to-end, decentralized training, decentralized inference, and productization of an AI model. What I think we'll see, like, very shortly is that we'll begin that process. We'll begin a race where people are showing that pipeline to be operational. And as time goes on, you're going to like basically give, I don't want to say the average person, but maybe the average high-end technologist the ability to go and try an AI product. And to me, like, one of the really important things is like, are we doing volume? Are we generating, hundreds or thousands of AI apps every month? Like, people generate phone apps on the iOS App Store every month, right? We're not doing that in crypto broadly. I think we probably see 10 to 20 apps or something like that hit the market every month, but we want to get to tens of thousands. And same thing here. Like we're pre being able to launch an app, but when we start doing that iterative process, I think we're going to start to see more and more open solutions and competition with folks like OpenAI and Anthropic.
Michael, how could you snap your fingers and enable a more rapid adoption of a decentralized AI future?
Well, we need a liquid market in all these things. So we need big players. We need demand to come from the enterprise side of things. But obviously, this is a chicken and egg problem. I do think that at the end of the day, it is about the engineering solutions, and that if we do come up with a truly robust, privacy-preserving, efficient, decentralized machine learning model and decentralized inference system, then everything else becomes viable. And I think if you combine that with, when you first asked the question, David, I was thinking that one of my answers would also be policy. I think the moment policy is going to be potentially a major barrier. Like we've got both the US and the EU position on AI, not particularly friendly to decentralized models, because you've got this whole registration requirement. And if you are a decentralized network, you could be viewed by the US government as a single owner of a model, and therefore you need to be treated the same way that they treat Google and so forth. And obviously no decentralized network can actually respond to that, which is going to be a big problem. So I think there's got to be a different model. The UK jurisdiction is far more friendly. I think Switzerland is as well. So I actually think there's an opportunity to use some of those frameworks and places that fall within those jurisdictions to come up with some creative sandbox environments for decentralized AI, and just as importantly, decentralized or DeFi on DAI, to get this kind of almost regulatory imprimatur, so that you can bring in mainstream funding into this, so that you can bring in enterprise participation and so forth. Like getting a kind of a wrapper around this that says this is okay from a regulatory perspective could be one, alongside solving the engineering problem. I'm giving you two answers, basically. I mean, a combined catalyst. And obviously at DAIS, we're trying to think about what can we do to tackle both of those in the interest of actually solving the market problem that really is about high level demand on a major scale.
Thanks, Michael. Well, you come from media, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you was around this view that I heard the other day, which is that if we recall the News Corp deal that was done with OpenAI, remember News Corp sort of shared their data with OpenAI for training models. Someone opined that that was kind of a short-sighted thing to do. It's like selling your data for maybe like a fixed price or something like that. Whereas in the future, they saw more media companies doing something a little bit smarter, which is taking their own data and then like fine-tuning their own models on that data, and then having more of a transactional business model around that, which might be a little bit more robust. So I was curious, like, what do you think of News Corp and OpenAI's deal? And do you agree with that view? Do you think media will start becoming kind of AI issuers as well?
I tend to share that view. When I saw that, and I think some of the other media deals as well that have been done, I thought, wow, that's just a desperate move. Remember, media, and I've had to live through the media cycle since the advent of the internet and seen what it's done to publishing. And it's one of the reasons I'm sort of so incensed about the need to reinvent the information system we work on, is the harm that's been done to journalism in particular. So I saw this as a desperate move to kind of keep the business afloat, and short-sighted, yes, that it would ultimately, it's a blip in terms of all of the data that these LLMs are now and will in the future be using, and therefore it makes them utterly expendable. So yeah, I don't think this is the right move. What I've been interested in, and this is one of the things we explored in the book I wrote with Frank McCourt, Our Biggest Fight, was what does the world look like when we have actually sort of pushed data and control of it into the hands of users? And that's a whole other problem that we can deal with and discuss, but we won't have time for now. But, to the degree to which data is in people's and businesses' hands, the data that they generate, and they become, essentially able to market that in some way, I actually think media companies become quite interesting intermediaries in that data exchange. Media is the means by which we connect with each other. We learn about the world and we build communities around them. It's the content that drives this connectivity. And so in our book, we sort of envisaged a world in which I'm now using my data as an intent expression. I want to buy a car, and I can provably say that in this environment. And, it'll be privacy preserved. You don't know who I am, but I am an absolutely, maybe I'm staking some ETH or something to stand up my commitment to that. And now out into the marketplace, there is this piece of data that is extremely valuable because all the car dealerships are interested. That's a buyer, right? And now they can start competing for this. I get the best price, and the media company is the broker in the middle of that. So it's just one of many ways in which this could play out. But I think that, media companies, I've been banging this drum and talking to media executives, and some of these biggest companies for many years, and they just can't get out of the mindset of where they've come. It's very difficult for them to see, a few years out, because at any given day, they're fighting to keep their cash cow businesses alive, and they're draining. So, yeah, I sadly think it's the wrong way to approach this. I think there's so many more creative things that they could be doing. And I don't know, hopefully some other ideas will come up before it's too late.
Michael, so you make a compelling argument about the need and the principles behind, an open AI future. Jake's been advocating for this for some time. I guess I shouldn't call it an open AI future. I should call it a decentralized AI future, the opposite of open AI future. So if people are convinced listening to this, how can they engage with the Decentralized AI Society? What can they do, and how can they be a part of what you're working on?
Yeah, so before we give that, just a very quick description of what we expect and want the society to be. It is a marketplace of sorts. Now, we're not an exchange. We're not actually in the business of building that, but we do want the various constituent members of this emerging ecosystem to form part of DAIS, and so that there is that interplay between, say, the providers of the compute, the infrastructure providers. Filecoin, for example, is one of our founding members, and they are obviously a decentralized storage provider. But then on the other side, you'll have all the developers of the AI agents and the various applications essentially being buyers of that infrastructure. And then these other parties in the middle that are trying to sort of aggregate all the stuff through deep in aggregation and building marketplaces around compute. And anybody that is, and that includes, of course, existing layer one protocols who are in crypto but are seeing how important their own technology is going to be for the purposes of, validating data and creating the framework around which these decentralized systems can work. Those guys as well are showing interest to come in. So the easiest thing, DAIS.global is the website, no .com or anything. DAIS.global is the site. There is some information about our mission. There's details on how to join. There's also, most importantly, kind of a sign up registry option in there that people can put some information into and let us know that they're interested. But I can be reached. LinkedIn's a good place to find me, Michael John Casey there. Twitter, I'm Mike J. Casey. I also have a website that badly needs updating, so don't be offended if you find that it's lacking anything contemporary. I need to fix it. It's www.michaeljcasey.com.
Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. We really appreciate you joining us on the show and sharing Decentralized AI Society and some of your thoughts on Decentralized AI with us. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for listening. Let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review and let us know what you thought of the show with Michael. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I am at jbrook, JBRUKH, and David is at Pacman, Pakman. And of course, follow Michael as well, Mike J. Casey on Twitter. Make sure you download where you get your podcasts, and we'll be back soon to dig deep on ideas of the blockchain space. Thank you.